Good to see you all tonight. Um, Man, now I'm hungry. You guys made me hungry. Like over here talking about Southern food, and I'm just, woo. Um, Man. So anybody watch the news? No. Anybody see about the osprey that crashed in Australia? Did you guys see that? Um, just a point of prayer. I'm just trying to be honest because I've been feeling it a lot today. One of the men who died was one of my best friends from college, and so he was in my wedding, and very special, very special young man. He was the commanding officer in the situation. His name is Tobin Lewis. So if you pray for his family, he has a wife and three beautiful daughters. And I just can't even. 37 years old, just can't even imagine. Just what they're going through, and of course, all of us friends that were together. We've just been mourning together, like through text messaging and all the things. But it's been heavy on my heart today, and so just pray for me, pray for my friends, family. I know that it's just a really sad loss. He was in the Marines, and he had told me so many times that when he finished the Marines, he wanted to be a missionary pilot. And so it's just like, I think that's hard for me to know. That's what he wanted to do once he retired from the military, and just a man of God. And he got married like a month after we did, and it was just, we had a lot of very similar moments in our friendship, and so been very reflective on that today. So that was Sunday. So I found out Monday night. Got a call from our little small group that there's 10 of us. It's very special. 5 guys, 5 girls. We did everything together, and see, two of them got married. 2 sets of marriages came out of them, and then he's the second one who's passed away of that group, which is really bizarre. Our other friend Lucas died of cancer. Not long after I graduated from college, so it's been some time. So that was weird too. I think we all were feeling that other loss from. It's kind of weird of like the 5 guys, 2 of them have passed. So, but yeah, so pray for me because I've been feeling very emotional today, and but that's a good thing. We're not mad at that, We're allowed to feel all the things. But I figured I'd tell you in case I just feel something. I might have to pause for a second and think about the good stuff, because there's also the hard stuff. So we have been on a little journey about followership, and talking about discipleship in kind of a new and fresh way. Last week we talked about the Gospels and just kind of unpacked that each Gospel had kind of an overarching theme that I was identifying as I was reading through, and talked about nearness in the book of Matthew. In the book of Mark, we talked about being spirit-led. In the book of Luke, we talk about inclusion. And then in the book of John, we talked about really inclusion into the community of God. And then in the book of John, we talked about how God loves to individualize kind of our personal journeys and make them unique to us. And so this week, we're going to continue that followership into the epistles, which are all the letters in the New Testament. I'll mention a few things about Acts. I'm not going to really go into Revelation. There is a little bit of followership in Revelation if you're curious. At the very end, there's a few following moments. But I want to just remind us a little bit about followership and the word follow. If you haven't been here, it's a good little catch up. The word follow literally means to accompany, moving in the same direction. If you break it down to its most primitive form, it means full going, or to go fully. And then in Greek, throughout the New Testament, the word is, I wrote it under here for you, akalutheo is the word for follow. And it's basically derived of the word road and way. And then at the beginning, this little a is called a particle of union, indicating that when this is here, you're showing a unity or a union of the way. So following is when your way is in union. And so for us, that is the call for us. And I was thinking about the phrase "follow me" as kind of like a precursor for our conversation tonight. And I went back and I was like, how many times did Jesus use the exact phrase "follow me"? And it's 13 times in the gospel, which is a pretty big amount of times. I think it ends up being a minimum of 3 in each one, and then one has 4. And so there was this moment of reading through all of these where I'm like, like it does keep coming up, and it does keep like. When you find something that's in all 4 of the Gospels, it's like you got to pay attention, because these 4 very different people all remember that phrase. And just to give you a little context, the first 3 Gospels are written pretty shortly after Jesus is died and come back to life. So in the late 30s AD is when you get those written. And the book of John is in like 89, 88. So it's a lot later in the story. So even the fact that he's still recollecting that phrase "follow me" years later kind of highlights its significance and its prominence. And it's funny though, because once that happens, following almost goes out the window, if I'm honest with you. As I was reading through the epistles, I'm like, there's no more following. Like, it's weird. There's like, I'm looking for the words like follow, and it's like not coming up very much at all. I think it ended up in the whole rest of the Bible, I think it was less than 12 times. Like very, very irregular. Most of the following actually had no connection with Jesus. Most of the following had to do with "do not follow." Was like the biggest phrase, and normally it was either like the patterns of this world, or "do not follow evil ways," or things kind of akin to that. And so I thought that was actually really interesting, because I'm like, what happens with following? Like, what happens in that process? And I thought I'd share a few things that I've been really thinking about and pondering concerning this before we have our first question for the night. But if you go and you start in the book of Acts, it first shows up in Acts chapter 9, and then it happens about 6 or 7 more times all the way to the end of 24 in Acts. They start talking about the people who are followers, that they just say they're the ones who, like, they don't follow, but they're the way, like they're on the way, they're in the way. And so the idea that Jesus is the way, he says this in John, they start getting connected to this idea where they're not as much following in that direct manner, which is what we see in the Gospels. So these people in the Gospels are direct witnesses of what's going on. Now you're kind of getting into your secondary witnesses, your tertiary witnesses, etc. And now they're not following Jesus, but they're following the way of Jesus. Does that make sense? So that's kind of what happens, is the language, because they're not directly following him as a student would have. They're like a student of a student of a student, a lot of the time. And because of that, they start saying, "Oh, we are followers of like the way," And so a lot of that way language comes up in the book of Acts. And I think that's why this is my personal guess. I think that's why the following language kind of goes away, because there's not that direct contact in that same fashion as what you got with those who were writing the Gospels, those eyewitnesses of Jesus. But it's funny, because there is a little bit of a pivoting that happens in the way that followership, I think, unfurls. And I was raised on the King James Bible, which is like a really old way, and it's got like really old language. But I was remembering that it actually does use the word "follow" in one passage very explicitly, and it's 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1. Again, this is in the King James. Most of your Bible translations will not have "follow," but it says, "Be ye followers of me," this is Paul writing, "even as I also am of Christ." Most of your translations don't say "follow." They probably say "imitate." is kind of like the word that shows up, or they say be imitators. Paul says, "Be imitators of me, as I am, an imitator of Christ." And so I wanted us to think for our first question, what is the relationship between following and imitating? Okay? Like, why do you think that imitation becomes kind of like the language that's used? We'll get into it in a second, but it's massive how much imitation it's in almost every epistle, which I think is fascinating too. But why is imitation the next step in the process of followership? So I would love for you to get in your groups, and the question is tied to why imitation, as the, we'll say, replacement of sort of followership. Okay? And would love for you to break into your groups and talk about that right now. I'll give you 5 minutes. Why? Or what's the relation? Maybe is another way of saying it. Like, what's the relation between the two? Be friendly. Meet somebody. If you don't feel comfortable, that's okay too. All right. Let's come back together. What are some of the words that came up? Um, what's some of the words that came up in your groups? Don't everybody answer at once. Mimic. Okay. Intentional. What was that? Mirror. What was that? Be like. A few more. Oh, what? Conscious. Some more back here. Acting. I need another one from over here. I feel like it's too much genius to just let y'all slide like that. Oh man, I'll call on you, Pastor Michelle. Oh, okay, that's fine. A short sentence is acceptable. Okay, so we'll use that word. I mean, it's funny because what she just said was like, oh, conscious, intentional, like, she used, without using those words, that sentence had all of those things in it. Yeah, so I was sitting there and I was just like thinking about this, you know, this imitation as replacement for followership. And I think the biggest mindset in my brain that came out is that when I think of followership, um, I often think of things that are external. And so when I think about if I'm following Jesus, like Jesus is at that door, right? And I'm following him. I think that's a lot of what's happening when we're following. I think imitation, it moves internal. That a lot of imitation is not just looking at something and doing it. It is internal in some ways. And so I feel like there's that natural progression, and I think most of us know this. Like when we first come to Jesus, we're like, he's amazing. We want to follow him with our whole hearts. We're running after him. We want to do all the things he does. And then there comes a moment, I think so many of us have found that, where we're like, that's actually not enough. Like all of that running after him isn't enough, and now I need another level of becoming, of changing, of transforming, however you conforming, and so imitation I think becomes this powerful word because this idea of imitation, the etymology really of it is image, and so the whole point of following. The end of following, if we could say that, is that you are now an image of whatever you've been following. And it's funny because, imaging or image bearing, however you want to say it, it is the beginning of the story. Genesis, at the very beginning, God makes humanity in his image, male and female, in his image. And so there's this weird reality that all of this is so that we would get back to who we were originally made to be, which is these imagers in the world, these, wonderful imitators, these mimics, I was laughing because the word imitate even is where we get our word meme from, M-E-M-E, meme. It comes from this Greek word, which is the word for imitate. Mimetes is the word, and we get our word mime from that, mimic, meme. And all of those things have this picture. To copy something, to portray something is like the big picture underneath it. But I thought that this was interesting. In church history, there's been all sorts of words used to describe this process of imitation or this process of becoming or imaging, however you want to say it. And I wanted to talk about a few of them because I think it's interesting for us to think this way. One of the terms that we've probably heard at some point in church is sanctification. It's the process of making something more holy than it was before. Another word that's been used is, it's used in Latin. It's a Latin word that's used in Lutheran spaces as well, and it's conformitas, which is from the word conforming, which basically has this picture of that you're being so formed. All of your following, all of your pressing in is being so formed that your shape is the same as the one that you've been following after. And then in the Roman Catholic tradition, as well as the Greek Orthodox tradition or other Orthodox traditions, they call this process theosis. And I think I like the definition of this word because I think it's very helpful for us. And it's that we become so hospitable in here that we have invited, like we become so hospitable to God that we then become like him because we've welcomed him in that much. And I think that's the heart of imitation, is that we have so opened ourselves to be like him, to bring him close, to bring him inside, to bring him in the midst of our lives, right? We talked a little bit about this with Matthew, where he's saying the kingdom is near, it's nearness, it's withness. But I think a lot of times when we talk about withness, we end up talking about withoutness. He's with us, but he's outside of us. What happens when he's with us and he's in us? And then how do you follow? That's my question for us, is how do you follow when he's in you? So I think there's interesting words like conscience, intentional. These words are really fascinating to me and really helpful. But I do wonder how much we recognize the invitation to be like him and how much it's there. And the reason why is because this word, mimetes, when it shows up in a verbal way, it is it's like almost every single time, it ends up being, there's always the sense that it is middle in its voicing to highlight that if you're going to conform or mimic or to become, like, you have to take a personal step of engagement. I think so oftentimes this is that line of delineation. It's easy when Jesus is like, hey, come follow me, and you're like, okay, I'll follow you. But then when you get to him and he's like, actually, I want to reside in you, you're like, now that's different. Now that's different. It's a little more uncomfortable. To invite God into my life. Now, we've heard people say words like, you ask Jesus into your heart, right? But I'm like, that's part of it. But I think the other part of it is, are you asking God who is in you, as you followed him, to then show you how to follow him like that? And I told somebody the other day, I was thinking about this a ton in the last couple weeks because in this season, I don't know about you, I feel like this season kind of feels like a wide open canvas. That's what it feels like to me. I don't really know what's out there. I don't really know what's to come in the picture. It just feels like a big white canvas. And I'm like, well, what do? And I'm like, you just put something on there. And they're like, well, did you pray? Did you ask God what you need to put on there? I'm like, honestly, if he's in me, I just need to start doing. I just need to start attempting. If I get it wrong, he can fix it. If I get it right, cool. But there's a different level of courage when you become an imitator. I was laughing, I was thinking about, similar to imitator is an impersonator, right? The difference is the impersonator puts everything on the outside and then tries to be like someone instead of putting everything on the inside so that I would become like someone. And that's the invitation. It's like we're done here at NewSong just putting on Christian. And in fact, Pastor Alvin on Sunday said, he's like, I don't even want to say that I'm a Christian. He's like, I'd rather say I'm a follower of Jesus. just because of all the language that's now tied to that simple phrase. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to put that thing on. I want to be something so much that everybody else is like, I don't know what that is. Because if you read through the Gospels and you read the epistles, that's what they're all saying the whole time. Who is this man? How does he have this kind of authority? How can he do these things? Why does he seem to be, again, going back to last week, like, why is he so willing to include everyone into the community? Why is he so willing to personalize my experience with him? Why? Because at the end of it, he is what it's all about. And so why does he do all these things? Because he genuinely desires for all of us to look like this. Which is why in Genesis, he made humans to look and be like him in his image. You know, it's not like he's like, oh, I just created them just to make them like me. No, he wanted us to be with him in everything he's doing all the time. So I'm like, what are the, how do we do this? What's going on here? And I thought that we could look at a couple of the verses that imitate comes up in, and we can maybe navigate it a little bit. The big one that we just mentioned, 1 Corinthians 11:1, I want to highlight one thing about this because it shows up earlier in Corinthians in chapter 4. But it's interesting because in chapter 4, he uses the word imitate to highlight a paternal relationship between him and them who are like following. You know, he's like, follow me. Like I'm kind of like the dad. Would you follow me? But it's funny because he's not saying, follow me like a dad because I know everything. He's saying, follow me like a kid follows a dad because I too am a kid following a dad. And so there's this sense that although it seems like paternal in some ways, it's really not like, oh, he's not just being a dad. He's trying to say, my whole existence is to be an example of what Christ looks like in everything he does. And so, in fact, in this time period, it's a very patriarchal system that's in place, in this time period. And he kind of begins to flip the script a lot on this patriarchal system. Because in that system, all the power goes to the patriarchy. And in all of these conversations about following and imitating, they're flipping it and saying, actually, all the power, although it should be in the Father, it's that it's being given to everyone else as well. That's a big deal for us because it means that part of our following, part of our imaging, part of our is that we begin to come into this realization that God is trying desperately to get through to us to reverse the mindset of what does it mean to be a follower or a leader, like we've been saying. It's not about power. It's not about strength, might. Following is not to get to the top. Following Jesus is not about getting to the top. Following Jesus, in some ways, is knowing you can be at the top and always choosing the bottom. Guys, I know this is highly disruptive because our whole world is not formed this way, right? You are formed from the very, very early age to what? To progress, to ascend, to go higher, to get pay increases, to get positional changes. And so much of following Jesus is not that. It's not going after it in that way and going in an opposite direction most of the time. Because if you remember the story of Jesus, the one who we're modeling and imitating our whole lives after, and if you read in Corinthians where this verse is, it's all about his death, burial, and resurrection. That is what we're imitating. How often are you dying? You dying in your job? Good. You can also come alive in your job. good. you know, like there's this sense of the invitation for us is not just to succeed, it's to become like him. Now, that does not mean, just hear me out, that does not mean that you will not find success in certain areas of your life. Our pastor is a great example. God has done so many amazing things through him working in the business realm. And we were talking about today, he's like, guys, I didn't do, I run an IT company and I don't even know how to do IT, And because he's following. That's his formation, has been following. I was thinking about this the other day. Same thing for me. Like when we came here, you have to understand. Like the number one, the last place I wanted to be is Washington D.C. Like on my list, it's not near the top at all. It's probably the last city ever. But secondarily, I never wanted to be a pastor. Never. Was raised by two of them. Never wanted to be a pastor. They're great people. I just didn't want to do it because I saw what they lived. But I recognized that this was a following. So it's, okay, Jason, I'm asking you to be like me. Number one, will you go low? Will you go low to the place you don't want to go? Yes, Lord, I will. And we came here. Jason, will you be a pastor who leads and shepherds and cares for people, not because it's the thing to do, but because I am a shepherder, carer of people. Right? It changed me. I'm like, oh, I don't have to feel the title pressure. I'm becoming like him because this is what he does. People are always like, how do you know my name? And I'm like, because he knows our names. And I'm trying to become like him. Because I want to follow his example. I want to follow it. It's not just because I woke up one day and I was like, I'm excellent at people's names. It's not that. It's Lord, how can I be like you? How can I know the sheep? Right? That's what he says. He's like, my sheep know my voice. I'm like, how can they know that I care for them, I value them, I'm praying for them, I'm with them in it? It's by knowing their names. It was something very simple. It was a following. And I didn't even know this when I was doing it, Because, again, he's outside. I'm like, I'm following the leader, And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, oh, I'm doing all the things he does. This is cool. I didn't try. It's because my following became imitating, where I allowed it. I welcomed it in. All the things I didn't want, I welcomed them in. And do you know that most of the time, the process for anything to be shaped and fashioned and formed is putting things in and pulling things out. That is the process. So there's times where you try something and it doesn't go well at all. And you got to scoop that stuff out. Try again. Like I love the potter's wheel, right? Like such a beautiful image, They're constantly adding clay, pulling clay out, slicing clay off the top, And then sometimes they're like, we got to start completely all over again, smash that thing, put it on the wheel, And I'm like, that is our lives. That is our lives. And we are able to say yes. I think that's part of the outside following to the inside forming, is saying yes to, Lord, will you come and make me like you? I was talking to someone today, and I just kept going back to this. I told you guys about this. I listen to these crazy monks that are in New York City. I know, guys, I'm a weird person. But I was so struck because they were just talking about why Mary is such a good follower. And I think I mentioned this to you all. And they said she's such a good follower because she has an empty womb. She's empty on the inside. What does she say to the Lord? I'm of lowly estate. Like I don't have anything to give you an offer. But that emptiness is what held the Son of God for 9 months. Like, guys, that's amazing. And we see her, she's changed by that, internally and externally, by carrying God. It's crazy. And we see all the things that happen. She finds joy in it. She ponders all these things that are happening. Her cousin acknowledges that things are happening in her. Her husband acknowledges that something's happening within her that has nothing to do with him. This is formation. This is conforming. This is imitation. And I know sometimes we're not cool with Mary and evangelical church, but I'm like, listen, there's something special about that picture. To say, are we being formed? Are we actually imitating the God that we love and that we are serving? I think that one of the things that I also liked about this verse, I'm so hung up on this verse, the follow me as I follow Christ. This kind of phrasing shows up a couple other places in the Bible, and all of them have to do with becoming like God. So one of them, you might have remembered it, but it's be ye holy as I am holy. One of the other phrases, same construction or same sentence structure, is be ye merciful as I am merciful. And then the third one is be ye whole, or sometimes translated perfect, as I am perfect. It's probably best rendered as like mature, or that you've grown to proportion. And this is so important to us because he's using the same phrasing of be ye followers as I am a follower to remind them of the kinds of things that they can find if they want to imitate. Are you holy? Are you merciful? Are you growing to proportion? Some of us have done a really good job in growing into the likeness of Jesus in some ways. And in other ways, we're failing tremendously. What happens when I invite him in to that area? Oh, God, I'm so good at mercy. I'm so good extending kindness and mercy to other people. It's easy for me, but I don't want to grow that area. My impatience. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. I don't want to grow in patience. But that means I'm also not growing in love. And if I'm not growing in love, then I'm following the wrong way. Because his way and all of his ways are love. So you start to recognize, man, the invitation is so much more than what I think it is. I step in, I'm like, oh, he's carving me, he's shaping me. I'm becoming like him in this area. And then you go home and you're like, have a fight with your family members or your kids or your relatives or your office workers. And you're like, I'm not like him at all. And this is many of our days. But this is all about our heart and our posture of where is he in this? Not outside you, inside you. And how does that change it? So instead of pushing things away from you, maybe you bring those things in closer to you that are hard to deal with, hard to handle. It's funny because I was very surprised. A number of the verses that I had found, they talked about how this imitating so many times in Thessalonians particularly. And in Thessalonians, there's multiple usages of imitating, and they're all connected to a few things. And one of the things is that it's connected to suffering. I'm sorry, but there is a certain amount of pain and difficulty that happens when becoming like him. There is. And then at the same time, one of the other words that's always connected to this idea of imitation is steadfastness. It's almost always in the verses accompanying with this word, imitate. And it's that word to be steadfast. That means we have to keep going. We can't stop just because it gets hard and difficult or because it gets uncomfortable. We just keep going. And there's hope in that going. I always tell my wife, Danielle, I'm like, I know it's hard right now. I know it's difficult. But I'm like, if we can take one step today, just one, in becoming like him, it'll be enough. Maybe today we don't get any steps in, but we're not going backwards. I'm not going to stop following. I'm not going to stop asking to be like him. we are intrepid. Like we don't stop with him until we're done. And we're done when we're done. When everybody starts looking at you and going, whew, you look like Jesus, you smell like Jesus, you hug like Jesus, you walk like Jesus, you talk like Jesus, then you're probably done. You're probably done. You're good. Maybe like a couple years of that, and then be like, all right, we've done it. maybe keep going a little bit more, you know? But that is the reality that we're being invited into, that we would be that way. I remember really vividly, I got really brave and I started praying that prayer that I was just telling you. I started praying every morning, Jesus, I want to walk like you. I want to talk like you. I want to smell like you. I want to see like you. I want to hear like you. I want to feel like you. I just started doing that every day. And I'm telling you what, it was the weirdest season of my life. You know what was so weird about it? Is because I didn't do anything except be open to being like him. And everybody else started noticing that I was becoming. And I wasn't even noticing that I was becoming. And all of a sudden, I'm in a small group and I'm hugging someone. Like, I feel like Jesus just hugged me. And I'm going, I prayed that. It's weird. Another time walking by somebody, they're like, I don't know what it is about your smell. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, no deodorant today or something? They're like, it's like you just have like a fragrance on you. And I'm like, I prayed that. You know, it's like, why do I feel like when I look into your eyes that I feel like Jesus is looking at me? And I'm like, I prayed that. You know, I'm like, it was this weird season. I wasn't trying. I was just inviting. Because the following is he's inviting us to him. And the imitation is me inviting him back. Did you catch that? That the following is when he invites me to him, and the imitation is me inviting him back. And then you don't have to do it. You just have to be open to it. That's so powerful. It's just so powerful to me. That so much of this imitation is me relinquishing my power, relinquishing my energies, my skills, my offerings. I'm relinquishing all of that. And I am becoming weak. And I'm becoming empty so that he might be seen. And he might be known. Because at the end of imitation, it always says that my life looks like selfless love. That's the end. That your life looks like selfless love. Because what do we see in the one who we're following is that at the end, he looked like selfless love. He died on a cross. Selfless love. All of our selfishness is dealt with in the cross. All of our desire for power, our struggles to achieve, is all on the cross. And we look at him in that moment, and we don't see him as a hero. We don't see him as a marvel and a wonder. We see him as empty and broken. And because he's empty and broken, we can then believe that our empty and broken lives are not done. Because that is not the end of the story. It's the end of him carrying everything like us. And then he comes back to life so that we can join him in that life. So that our whole life will smell like resurrection, will look like resurrection. And everyone who interacts with us is going to say, what's that life on you? I don't know what that life's like. I don't know what that's all about. But I want that. Over and over and over again in all of these other verses. And for instance, we'll just use another one in Ephesians, be imitators of God as dear children. Children are the kings and queens of imitation. You don't even have to tell them to imitate. They naturally do it. What happens to us when we posture our lives like that, like children, like a woman with an empty womb, like fishermen who know nothing? And the Lord's like, you don't have to know anything for me to use you. He loved unlearned men, is what it says in the scriptures. It's amazing. I don't feel like I know anything about this guy, but I'm willing, and that's enough. The invitation is enough. Jesus, will you come? Will you change? Will you conform? Will you make? Will you help me be an imitation of you in the earth? And I love this because, again, going back to my Corinthians passage, if you go read everything around it, it's a pretty complicated situation that's happening, which we're going to be talking about 1st and 2nd Corinthians on Sundays for the fall, which is going to be really interesting, studying this church out a little bit. But one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about this is that most of the argument that's going on in the situation before he uses this verse of be ye followers or imitators of me as well, is that they're all fighting about what their rights are. What are my rights? What can I do and what can I not do? And he's like, if you're trying to figure out what you can and can't do, you're missing the point. Because it's not about your rights, what you can and what you can't do. It's about how much you're going to love. That's just it. It's literally, the whole thing is that I'm relinquishing all of my rights. Which, guess what the world teaches you? Take up your rights. That's what the world teaches. Take your rights up. You have rights, take them up. And Jesus is like, give all your rights away and show people what love looks like. That's uncomfortable. It's not easy stuff we're talking about. But there's something powerful about it, because when we begin to renounce that position, that right, that accomplishment, that whatever you want to call that, you start to live a life. When you're really living in love, you start to live your life for the sake of others. If you're about your rights, you're about yourself, but you start to live for the sake of others. And I was thinking about this at jiu-jitsu, because my son's in jiu-jitsu. And if you want to try jiu-jitsu out, we have an amazing guy in the church that he teaches jiu-jitsu. So you should let me know and I'll hook you up, because they're the best. It's the best place. God is there. Like when you walk in, you're like, God is here. It's awesome. And there's these moments where they're rolling, and that's like the term used to when they're kind of like sparring. And so many days there's like not enough kids, and so a coach has to, roll with these little kids. And so, it's like a 17-year-old coach, and then it's like my 7-year-old, massive difference. And I just watch them, and it's like, because he's there for the sake of others and not for himself, he doesn't need to make that little child submit. He doesn't force him, you're going to learn the hard way. No, he lowers himself. So many times they're on their knees and they're lowering themselves, or they'll start in a bad position for them and a good position for the kid. And I'm like, that is what imitation looks like. That our God chose in Jesus to put himself in the lowest position for our sake, for our benefit. And that's the invitation, is just to put yourself in the same place. It doesn't mean that you're going to know how to do it, but will you position yourself to be imitators? Would you position yourself to be put into the situation where your life is for others and not for you? And I was thinking about my friend, because the 3 people who died in that, and I don't know any of the details, so this could be completely farce. Like, it could be completely fake. But it was like, the people who died was my friend, the commanding officer, the pilot, and then I think it was the co-pilot. And I'm like, of course they're the ones who died. And the other 20 people lived. Why? Because I know how the military operates. And it's like, we got to save them all. And they would put themselves in that position. And I mean, like, that's what I feel in my heart. Maybe I'm wrong, but I felt in my heart, I was like, Lord, I need you to talk to me about this. This is so hard for me. And he's like, your friend lived for the sake of others. And I believe that because he did when I knew him. And I saw him every day. He would live for the sake of other people. That's part of why he joined the military, for the sake of other people. It's why he wanted to be a missionary, for the sake of others. And that is our imitation. It's not popular in our culture, by the way. Nobody wants to imitate this kind of life. Everybody wants their life, their truth, their way. And Jesus will give you that. Personalized. Remember, we talked about this. He'll give you your personal plan of imitation. But don't expect at the end for it not to be about other people. Then you're not getting it. You're missing the whole point. And if you're about your rights and you're about yourself, then you're not in the place of love. And if you're still holding on to whatever you think is going to get you there, it's not. It's not. Take it from somebody who tried it, and it didn't lead to anything but death for me. And it's only the grace of God that death did not win. And so I'm just saying, how can we be imitators? How can we be these people? How can we possibly step into the place in this season, in this hour, and say, it's not about me anymore? Because listen, the trust is that he's going to make it about you because he loves you, but you're to make it about someone else. Like, that's how it works. He'll take care of you, you take care of others. That's how it works. Most of us don't trust, though, that he's going to take care of us. And that's the confrontation of the Lord today, is that if you're going to be a follower, it's going to lead you to the place. I didn't want to say this, but Money said it last week, and it's been gnawing at me ever since. But one of the passages is that a man would take up his cross and follow me. You have to take up whatever will kill you. I don't know what that is for you. It's different for all of us. You want to know? I'll tell you what my cross is. How about that? Maybe it'll make you feel a little better. My cross is that I always want to be special and different from everyone else. That's what I want more than anything else. I don't want to be like anyone. I'm sorry, I just don't. And it's been my wrestle and my struggle for most of my life. Every place I've ever been, I'm like, I'm just outside of whatever. I went to a private school. We had uniforms. Everybody wore the same kinds of shoes, and I sure as heck wore a different kind of shoe. Every time. And you know what's so funny is that since I came here, the most consistent thing the Lord has said to me is, Jason, I want you to look at everyone and say that you're just like them. Oh, it was so hard. Because so much of my life was defined by my right to be different. Now listen, God made me fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm a marvelous work. I am not like anyone else, but I'm also just like everybody else. And my cross every day is to look at you and to remember that we are the same. On the days that I don't want to be the same as you. On the days that I want to be different than you. And maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal to you. But it's a big deal for me. And so guess what? If I talk to you and you feel like we're the same, then I'm doing some imitation that day. And if you're feeling like I'm really different, then maybe I'm not doing such a good job at imitation. And that's okay. I'm not mad if I'm not. I'm getting there. Like I said, come back to that prayer. Jesus, I'm going to walk like you, talk like you, smell like you, hear like you, hug like you, sing like you, whatever you want to come up with, write like you, draw like you, paint like you, program like you. You hear what I'm saying? Keep going with that. Adjudicate, defend, whatever you teach, whatever your job is. Like him, not like you, like him. And see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen, but I have a lot of excitement about what could be, what could happen. What happens if Amber shows up at her job and she starts teaching like Jesus to a bunch of fourth graders, right? Fourth graders. Number one, fourth graders have the highest level of self-actualization normally, so they know who they are, which is why they're so difficult to deal with. You start treating them like Jesus treats them, and all of a sudden, maybe they're just going to fall in love with Jesus. They're going to get it, because you're being that, It's crazy to think about. Like I would think about like Jason Yo, like programming, doing all this work in a computer. But I know him well enough to know that probably the more significant work that he's doing is not in the coding, it's in the conversations with the people that he's around. And if he can just talk like Jesus, what could happen? I don't know, man. I don't know. Wouldn't that be interesting to find out? These are the things I like to think about. The possibilities in this season, I feel like, are wide open for us. But it's going to take our willingness to say yes to the hard things, to the uncomfortable things, welcoming the things in that we don't want to welcome in. Because that's how we're formed into his likeness. Going back to Mary. It was not acceptable in that time period for her to have gotten pregnant. It was not acceptable. And yet she welcomed it. May it be according to your word. It's crazy, friends. I'm just been baffled by this thought of what does imitation look like? What does it look like for us to look and smell and sound like Jesus and act like him without trying? Because that's the key. Without trying. It's inviting and then doing. And some days he's with you in what you're doing, and some days he's like, actually, that won't it. Let's try again. Let's do that thing one more time. But I wanted to just say one more kind of big thing for us as we're thinking through this. At the very beginning of our wonderful journey that we've been on, we were talking about how, that followership is really the identity, and leadership is just the function. And I just was thinking about how, at the end of all this, imitation is identity. That when you really come into that place where you're shaped and you're fashioned and you're formed, that your identity comes to the surface the way it's supposed to from Jesus underpinning who you are. Instead of you putting something on, it's something that comes from within you because he brings it up in you. Because every one of us isn't going to do things like Jesus in the same way, but we're all going to do something like him in one way, shape, fashion, or form. That's what we're about. That's the body. That's the whole thing. That's the whole church. That's the whole picture, is that when all of you bring your forms of Jesus in together, he is a big form with us. And then everybody sees and everybody wonders, what is that? Could we be like that? The last thing I want to say is I have one question. That for most of us, the picture of being like Jesus is way out of reach. We're like, I don't know. Pastor Jason, that is way out of reach. I'm like, think of one person that you know, that you admire one thing about. Right now, like think of him. Who's that person? I like that one thing about that one person. How would you imitate that? Start there. And if you can do it with people, you can do it with God. Most of the time we don't believe that. But that's the process, is most of the time, if we can learn to imitate another person, we can also learn to imitate God. And so I'm just encouraging you to think, who is someone? You can, if you want to get in your group and talk about it, like awesome, we have a few minutes. And then asking the question, how are they imitating Christ? And whatever it is that you've seen in them that you want to imitate, how does that look like him? And then follow that. All right? Take 5 minutes, and then I'll pray for you guys. right, let's wrap it up. I'm going to just pray with you all, and then you can be dismissed. Before I pray, I want to just tell you that next Wednesday, we'll be doing a very special takeout. It'll be a little bit different, but we're going to talk about reading the Bible and how to study the Bible, okay? So I'll be teaching that. I'm going to try to give you all my tricks, all of my gifts, all of the things. If you're ever like, how did he get there? I'm going to try to help you with that. I think it's going to be really special, and Pastor Michelle has been hounding me for a while to do this, and I finally submitted to her. I'm just becoming like her, because she has so much more wisdom than I do. Anyways, next week, hope you come out. Really try to invite somebody who wants to learn more about how to get into this wild book, because it is a wild book. And I think it's going to be really special. So we're calling it Eat the Scroll, which is a funny thing. It's a funny phrase from the Bible that I was using, because I was like, yeah, that's what we want everyone to learn, how to eat this thing, and how to really get into it and eat it up. So let me pray for you all. I'm just going to pray, just simple imitation kind of prayer. Jesus, we just thank you that you are just the best. We thank you that you're the example, you're the model, you're everything we could ever hope to be. You're everything we ever hope to look like, to smell like, to act like, to walk like, to talk like. Lord, I just pray that this week we would just feel the annoying invitation from you to follow you, and also the annoying invitation of us to invite you in to our lives and bring all the stuff, everything that we've been hiding, everything that we've been keeping out, everything that we've not been welcoming. Lord, we just welcome it all to come in so that we can become like you this week, so that we could live our lives for the sake of others. And Lord, I pray that you'd help us trust that you will take care of us as we love others well, and that you are really good at loving us in a beautiful, personal way. Help us carry our cross this week. In Jesus' name, amen. Love you guys. Have a great night.